In the year 2000, a single company made $800 million in pure profit, doing absolutely nothing but making their own customers incredibly angry.
Right.
I mean, that $800 million, it represented 16% of their total corporate revenue. They didn't make that money by selling a product, and they definitely didn't make it by offering a premium service.
No, not at all.
They made almost $1 billion simply by penalizing their users for failing to return VHS tapes on time.
It is, honestly, it's one of the most astonishing statistics in modern business history.
Yeah.
You have a globally ubiquitous brand that is just financially addicted to the friction and the frustration of its own consumer base. And when you look at it through that specific lens, the story we're exploring today completely changes.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is a special installment of our investigative documentary series, Peak to Dust. Today, we are taking a massive stack of source material. We've got corporate histories, postmortem analyses, executive biographies, and the actual SEC financial filings.
The granular data.
Exactly, the granular data. We are unpacking the rise, the absolute global dominance, and the total terminal collapse of Blockbuster Video.
Yeah.
And right off the bat, to you, the listener, we need to throw out the conventional wisdom here.
We really do.
We've all heard the overly simplistic narrative, right? Blockbuster was a dinosaur, the internet was a meteor, and Netflix was the impact crater.
Right.
But the documents you brought in show a diagnostic landscape that is way more complicated and honestly a lot more fascinating to examine.
Absolutely. The whole, internet killed the video store narrative is essentially a myth. Because when a multi-billion-dollar empire falls, you are rarely looking at a single clean fracture.
No, it's never just one thing.
Exactly. You are looking at systemic, cascading failures that masquerade as success right up until the literal moment of death.
Right.
The data reveals that Blockbuster dies because its structural foundation, a suffocating pile of corporate debt, and an absolute reliance on punitive customer fees made it fundamentally incapable of surviving the shift to a digital, data-driven landscape.
So the architecture of their dominance was, ironically, the exact mechanism of their demise.
That is the core thesis, yes.
Okay, well, let's unpack this from the very beginning, because the origin story of Blockbuster is not what most people think it is.
No, it really isn't.
This did not start as some passion project by a couple of film aficionados who just loved cinema. Here is where the historical record gets really interesting. Blockbuster was founded in October 1985 in Dallas, Texas, by a guy named David Cook.
Right.
And David Cook was actually a software supplier for the oil and gas industry.
And that background, it's the skeleton key to understanding Blockbuster's initial competitive mode. Cook ran a company called Cook Data Services.
Okay.
And when the Texas oil market tanked in the early 1980s, he obviously needed a pivot. His wife actually pointed him toward the video rental business. Now, at the time, the video rental industry was incredibly fragmented.
Yeah, if you think back to the early 80s, a video store was usually just, a guy named Bob with a spiral notebook behind a counter. And maybe 100 VHS tapes crammed onto a few wooden shelves.
Right, they had zero inventory control. It was totally chaotic. Tapes were constantly lost or they were stolen. And it was just impossible to scale that business model.
Right.
But Cook didn't look at this and see a Hollywood entertainment venture.
Mm-hmm.
He looked at it as a database management problem.
He brought an oil and gas logistics mindset to movies.
Precisely. He realized that if you could track inventory flawlessly, you could scale exponentially. So instead of opening a quaint little shop, he invested heavily in back-end logistics right away. He actually built a $6 million distribution center in Garland, Texas.
Wait, $6 million just for a warehouse in 1985? For videotapes?
Yes, because it wasn't just a warehouse. It was the nerve center of a massive computerized barcode system. Cook implemented a setup where every single tape had a unique barcode, which was then tied directly to a registered customer account via a computerized point-of-sale system inside the physical store.
I mean, this reminds me of the invention of the standardized shipping container in the global freight industry.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right, because the true innovation wasn't the stuff being moved inside the boxes. The true innovation was the flawless, scalable logistics of tracking and moving identical units. Cook essentially containerized the home video market.
He really did.
You have a central hub in Garland, and you have these computerized spokes in the stores. They could track exactly what was rented, exactly who had it, and, well, exactly down to the minute when it was due back.
And this logistical architecture immediately solved the scaling problem that had paralyzed all those mom-and-pop stores. Because the computer was handling the complexity, Cook proved that you could build a massive superstore for video rentals.
Right, because a local shop had maybe 100 titles.
Yeah, whereas Cook's first Blockbuster store in Dallas had 8 to 10,000 tapes. Opening night was such an unprecedented consumer experience that they physically had to lock the front doors to manage the overcrowding. People had just never seen that sheer volume of choice in one place before.
So he essentially builds a data-driven retail operation on day one. But what strikes me in the corporate histories is how incredibly short-lived Cook's tenure actually was.
It was very brief.
Right, he figures out the logistics, he proves the concept, but he doesn't stay around to build the empire.
He doesn't. And the reason why is a classic tale of corporate culture clash. By 1987, Cook's operation is successful, but he needs massive capital to expand.
Okay.
He tries to take the company public to raise funds, but a highly critical article in Barron's magazine comes out, questions his financial projections, and completely torpedoes the public offering.
Oh, wow, so suddenly the money dries up.
Exactly. Cook is suddenly desperate for cash. Enter a trio of investors: Wayne Huizenga, John Melk, and Donald Flynn.
And these guys are not tech guys, and they certainly aren't movie guys.
Not even close. They were former executives at Waste Management, Inc.,
The garbage business.
the garbage business. Huizenga had co-founded Waste Management and grown it into the largest garbage disposal business in the world through a really ruthless strategy of corporate roll-ups. They look at Cook's barcode-driven superstore, and they see a model that can be aggressively physically replicated across the entire country.
So in February 1987, they invest $18.6 million for a one-third controlling stake in Blockbuster.
Right.
The jump from oil data to garbage collection to video rentals is just wild. But the sources show an immediate, irreconcilable ideological split between David Cook and Wayne Huizenga. How did their visions for this company collide so fast?
It fundamentally came down to how you conquer a market.
Yeah.
Cook, the data guy, he wanted to grow through a franchise model.
Okay.
He wanted to sell the Blockbuster name and his proprietary computer software to individual entrepreneurs, taking a cut of their profits while letting them take on all the physical real estate risk.
Makes sense for a software guy.
Exactly. But Huizenga, fresh off consolidating the waste management industry, looked at it completely differently. In the garbage business, you win by owning the routes.
Right.
You win by owning the physical infrastructure and establishing a geographic monopoly. Huizenga wanted centralized control. He wanted company-owned stores.
He wanted to own the trucks, the routes, and the dumps, but, for VHS tapes.
Precisely. And this friction lasted all of 2 months. By April 1987, David Cook, the founder of the company, leaves entirely.
Wow.
Yeah. Huizenga takes the helm as CEO, and he applies the exact same hyper-aggressive consolidation strategy he used in the garbage business directly to the video rental industry.
Let's talk about the sheer speed of this rollout, because the numbers in these SEC records read like a military invasion.
They really do.
In 1986, there were 19 Blockbuster stores. By the end of 1987, there were 133 stores. By 1988, 415. By June 1989, 700 stores, and they hit their 1,000th store before the end of that same year.
It was exponential.
How do you physically open stores that fast? I mean, you can't just pour concrete and build shells at that speed.
Well, you don't build them. You buy them.
Right.
Huizenga executed a classic corporate roll-up. He wasn't just finding empty lots and building blockbusters from scratch. He was systematically buying out established local and regional chains to instantly eliminate the competition and acquire their real estate.
Just gobbling them up.
Yes. He bought the Southern Video Partnership. He bought Movies to Go for $14.5 million. He bought Major Video, which was actually the country's fourth largest chain at the time, for $92.5 million. And he bought Errol's for $30 million.
So wait, explain the mechanics of that. If I own a chain of 10 Bob's Video stores in Ohio and Huizenga buys me out, does he just change the sign on the door?
Essentially, yes. They buy your stores, they swap the signage out to the iconic blue and yellow, they remodel the interior to match the bright, family-friendly Blockbuster aesthetic, and most importantly, they plug your stores into David Cook's central Garland database.
Mm-hmm.
Overnight, your local store is assimilated into the Blockbuster mainframe.
And what were the actual economics inside those assimilated stores? Because from what I read in these histories, it wasn't the new release of Die Hard or Ghostbusters that was actually keeping the lights on.
That is a crucial point to understand. Huizenga instituted a few core operational policies that defined this era of the business. First, the stores were open 10 a.m. to midnight every day, which established immense reliability for the consumer.
You always knew they were open.
Exactly. Second, they maintained a strict family-friendly policy, so no X-rated adult films.
Yeah.
But the actual economic engine was their rental policy. They heavily promoted 3-day rentals.
Which encourages volume. I mean, if I have it for 3 days, I might as well rent 3 movies for the weekend instead of just one for tonight.
Exactly. And here is the most revealing data point from this era. 70% of Blockbuster's rental revenues came from older, non-hit movies.
The back catalog?
Yes.
Wait, 70%. So the vast majority of their money wasn't coming from the new release wall.
No, it wasn't. And from a margin perspective, that is brilliant. A brand new hit VHS tape was incredibly expensive to purchase from the studios.
Right.
But a movie that had been out for a year or two was vastly cheaper to acquire. So they stocked the stores with thousands of older titles, creating the illusion of infinite choice. And those cheap older tapes drove 70% of their revenue.
Okay, so if 70% of your revenue is coming from cheap back catalog tapes, and your primary method of growth is literally buying out every competitor in sight, I have to ask a foundational question about the company at this point.
Sure.
Was Blockbuster actually an entertainment company during this era, or was it merely an aggressive real estate roll-up masquerading as a video store?
That is exactly what Wall Street started asking, and it brings us to a major point of contention in 1989. Wall Street analysts started looking closely at Blockbuster's books, and they did not like what they saw.
What did they find?
In April 1989, a major stock brokerage issued a highly critical, incredibly damaging report condemning Blockbuster's accounting practices.
What were they actually doing?
Well, the analysts pointed out that Blockbuster's was utilizing financial smoke and mirrors to artificially inflate its profitability during this hyper-expansion phase.
Okay.
They were playing very aggressive games with depreciation and amortization.
Okay, let's make sure we have this right for the listener. Explain this amortization trick for us. How does a video store play games with its books?
Let's use a tangible example.
Oh.
Let's say Blockbuster buys a brand new VHS copy of Top Gun to put on the new release wall. They pay the studio premium price for it. Now, in reality, almost everyone who wants to rent Top Gun is going to do it within the first 3 to 4 months.
Right.
After that, demand drops off a cliff. The tape loses almost all of its revenue-generating value very quickly.
Right, it goes from the new release wall to the dusty back shelf.
Precisely. Under conservative accounting, Blockbuster should have written off the cost of purchasing that tape quickly, matching the expense to the short window where it actually generated revenue.
But they didn't do that.
No, they didn't. Blockbuster was spreading the costs of buying those massive numbers of hit VHS tapes over a 36-month period, over 3 whole years.
Wow, so they are pretending the expense of buying that tape is spread out over 3 years, which makes their immediate quarterly operational expenses look artificially low.
Yes.
Which in turn makes their current profit margins look amazing to investors, even though nobody is renting that copy of Top Gun in year 3. That sounds like a ticking time bomb.
It absolutely was. By amortizing the tapes over 36 months, they were inflating current earnings to keep their stock price high.
Which allowed them to keep borrowing money to buy more local video chains.
Exactly. Furthermore, the report noted that they were spreading the costs of purchasing the video store chains themselves over a 40-year period.
40 years.
Yes, and that 28% of their total revenue was reliant on one-time-only franchise fees rather than actual tape rentals.
So they were totally dependent on constant, aggressive physical expansion just to maintain the illusion of profitability. If they ever stopped growing, the math would just collapse.
Yes. The analyst basically painted a picture of a company whose financial health was heavily dependent on accounting tricks rather than underlying retail stability.
But the wild thing is, they get away with it.
They do.
They weather the storm, the stock price eventually recovers, and they just keep marching. They expand into the UK, Japan, Australia, Latin America, and this relentless physical expansion eventually achieves its goal. Because if you build a retail footprint that massive, you stop being just a store, and you become an unavoidable distribution channel.
Right.
Which attracts the attention of the media conglomerate.
Yes, and this brings us to what we can call the apogee of the company, the absolute zenith. In September 1993, Blockbuster proposes a merger with the media giant Viacom.
Okay.
The deal is finalized in 1994 for a staggering $8.4 billion. Viacom looks at Blockbuster and sees the ultimate physical pipeline directly into the American living room.
And under Viacom, Blockbuster reaches a scale that is almost difficult to comprehend today. let's look at their peak in 2004. By 2004, they have 9,000 global stores. They have 84,300 employees, and they are generating $5.9 billion in annual revenue.
It was total cultural ubiquity. The laminated blue and yellow membership card was in almost every single wallet in America.
Yeah.
The slogan, "Make it a Blockbuster night," was literally woven into the social fabric. And their operational logistics had evolved from David Cook's initial barcode system into something called the push system.
Let's break that down. How did the push system work? Because with 9,000 stores, you can't have individual store managers just guessing what movies to buy.
Exactly. The push system was a highly centralized, data-driven logistical supply chain. Blockbuster's regional managers and corporate algorithms would analyze national box office data, cross-reference it with hyper-local demographic data for every single zip code where a store was located, and they would anticipate demand.
Wow.
They didn't wait for a store manager to order tapes. They literally pushed the inventory to the stores a week in advance.
So if a particular zip code in Chicago historically rented more action movies, the system just automatically flooded that specific store with more copies of The Matrix than, say, a store in a suburb that skewed heavily toward family comedies.
Right. They completely controlled the physical shelves. They controlled what America watched on a Friday night because they dictated what was available to rent within a 5-mile radius of your house.
But this immense control breeds what the sources diagnose as an illusion of invulnerability. At this 2004 peak, Blockbuster's leadership fundamentally believed their geographic footprint was an insurmountable moat.
They really did.
They believed that because they had 9,000 physical locations, they had permanently won the war of convenience.
And that's exactly where the hubris sets in. They equated the word convenience entirely with physical proximity. To them, convenience meant that there was a brightly lit store on your drive home from work. They just couldn't conceive of a world where convenience didn't involve getting in a car.
Which raises a really important question. When I look at that $5.9 billion in revenue at their 2004 peak, I have to ask, how much of that was driven by genuine consumer loyalty?
Right.
Did people go to Blockbuster because they loved the Blockbuster brand, or did they go because Blockbuster had ruthlessly bought out every other video store in a 10-mile radius, leaving the consumer with literally no other choice?
The data strongly points to the latter. Customer satisfaction was actually demonstrably low.
Yeah.
It was heavily poisoned by their revenue extraction methods, which we will get to in a moment.
Yeah.
But you're right, the loyalty was a mirage created by a lack of alternatives. They were a geographic monopoly.
And this is the profound tragedy of the Blockbuster narrative. The seeds of their destruction are sown at the exact moment of their greatest triumph.
Yes.
2004 is their peak store count. It's the peak of their cultural relevance. But 2004 is also the year the financial architecture of the company is fundamentally permanently compromised.
This is the turning point. In 2004, Viacom, the parent company, decides they want out. They decide to cut Blockbuster loose and spin it off into an independent, publicly traded company.
Okay.
But this spin-off is not a clean break. Viacom doesn't just hand them the keys and wish them well. The mechanics of this separation were brutal.
Let's get into the mechanics of that, because this is where the autopsy really begins. How does a parent company spin off a subsidiary while sabotaging it at the same time?
Well, when Viacom spun off Blockbuster, they structured the deal so that Blockbuster was required to pay a massive, punitive special dividend to Viacom shareholders. They forced Blockbuster to pay a $5 per share dividend.
Okay, but if Blockbuster is just being spun off, they don't just have hundreds of millions of dollars in loose cash sitting in a checking account to pay that dividend, right?
Exactly. To afford this mandated payout to Viacom, Blockbuster was forced to take on massive debt. They had to take out a devastating $905 million loan purely to pay the dividend to the company that was abandoning them.
That is wild. It's like a homeowner being forced to take out a predatory mortgage just to pay a massive exit fee to their landlord. They start their independent life nearly $1 billion in the hole.
That $905 million loan was the fatal blow. And it was delivered before the digital streaming war even truly began. This debt paralyzed the company. If we pull the numbers from their subsequent SEC filings, the financial reality becomes incredibly bleak.
What do the filings show?
By 2010, Blockbuster's total debt would reach $1.46 billion, against only $1.01 billion in total assets.
Which means they have a debt ratio of over 120%. Even if they liquidated every single asset they own, every store, every shelf, every copy of Shrek, they would still be massively in the red.
Right. But the balance sheet is only half the problem. The operational impact of that debt is what actually killed them. When a company is that highly leveraged, their own risk factors in the SEC filings state it plainly. A substantial portion of cash flow from operations must be dedicated to the payment of indebtedness.
Meaning that every month, before you can invest in a new website, before you can research streaming technology, before you can improve the stores, you have to hand a massive pile of cash to your creditors.
Right. Funds are entirely diverted away from future working capital requirements, capital expenditures, and, most importantly, technological innovation.
It's like trying to run a corporate marathon while wearing a 100-pound lead vest. Every single attempt to pivot, every attempt to innovate, every attempt to build digital infrastructure was physically exhausted by the debt burden before it even began.
That is a great way to put it.
In fact, Reed Hastings, the co-founder of Netflix, later stated explicitly, if it hadn't been for their debt, they could have killed us. Netflix knew the debt was their greatest ally.
And here's where the tragedy compounds.
Mm.
To service this massive, suffocating debt, Blockbuster became mortally reliant on a highly toxic revenue stream. Because they had to feed the creditors every single month, they could not afford to optimize for the customer experience.
Yeah.
They couldn't offer grace periods. They couldn't be forgiving. They had to optimize for penalty extraction.
Which brings us back to the statistic we started with today, the friction profit center. Let's talk about the late fees.
The figures from the 2000 SEC filings are staggering. In that single year, Blockbuster generated $800 million purely from late fees, 16% of their entire corporate revenue.
Let's analyze the psychology of that, because building a business model on friction is fascinating and inherently dangerous.
It is.
As a customer, you have to drive to the store. You have to hope the movie you want is actually in stock. You drive home, and then the critical point of friction. You must remember to return it within a rigid time frame.
Yes.
You have to get back in your car, drive back to the store, and drop it in the slot before midnight. If you fail, you are financially penalized.
Blockbuster was financially dependent on customer failure. They made significantly more profit when their customers had a stressful, negative experience. That 16% revenue stream was a toxic asset because it actively generated consumer resentment. They were basically training their customers to hate them.
And while they were addicted to this toxic revenue and distracted by their debt, the sources show a chilling series of missed opportunities. Let's look at 1997.
Okay.
The DVD format is just emerging. It's a new, unproven technology. Warner Brothers approaches Blockbuster with a massive deal. They offer Blockbuster a 40% revenue share to rent DVDs to consumers before those DVDs are made available for retail sale.
It was a golden opportunity to control the new format.
All right.
Warner Brothers wanted Blockbuster to legitimize the DVD, but Blockbuster refused the deal.
Why? I mean, why turn down the future?
Because they were heavily invested in the economics of VHS. They had built their entire accounting structure, their shelving, their inventory systems around VHS. They viewed the DVD as a niche product that would cannibalize their tape rentals. So when Blockbuster said no, Warner Brothers took that exact same revenue-sharing deal to Walmart.
And Walmart accepts.
Walmart accepted, and they used DVDs as loss leaders. They started selling brand new DVDs for $5 just to drive foot traffic into their supercenters. And that entirely undermined Blockbuster's business model.
Of course it did.
Why would a consumer pay Blockbuster $4.50 to rent a movie when they could buy it forever at Walmart for $5? Blockbuster essentially handed their retail dominance to big box stores on a silver platter.
That is brutal, but it actually gets worse. Let's talk about the year 2000 and the Enron broadband deal. This is one of the weirdest footnotes in corporate history. How does a video rental store partner with an energy company to build a streaming platform?
It sounds totally absurd now, but in 2000, Enron had a division called Enron Broadband Services. They were laying miles of fiber optic cable, betting that high-speed internet was the future. Blockbuster signed a 20-year exclusive video-on-demand agreement with them. They actually successfully built and tested a platform to stream video over the internet to specialized set-top boxes in test markets like Seattle.
So Blockbuster had functional streaming technology in the year 2000.
They did. But after just 9 months, Blockbuster unilaterally abandoned the partnership.
Why pull the plug on something that visionary?
Several reasons. The technology was clunky, broadband penetration in American homes was still very low, and the Hollywood studios were terrified of digital piracy, so they refused to license their best movies for the platform.
That makes sense.
But fundamentally, Blockbuster's leadership lacked the commitment. They were so focused on maximizing the profits of their physical stores that they weren't willing to endure the years of heavy investment and massive losses required to see the streaming technology mature.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the most infamous corporate meeting of the 21st century, the $50 million error.
Oh, yes.
It's the year 2000. Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph, the founders of a fledgling startup called Netflix, fly to Blockbuster headquarters at the Renaissance Tower in Dallas.
And we have to remember the origin story of Netflix here. Hastings famously started the company after being furious over a $40 late fee he got from Blockbuster for the movie Apollo 13.
Right.
He realized the subscription model was broken. So Netflix was operating a DVD by mail service. They had no physical stores. They operated on a subscription model. And most importantly, zero late fees. You keep the DVD as long as you want.
But in 2000, Netflix is not the juggernaut we know today.
No.
They are bleeding cash. The dot-com bubble has burst, and they only have about 300,000 subscribers. They are desperate. So Hastings and Randolph sit down in a boardroom with Blockbuster CEO John Antioco, and they make a pitch: buy Netflix for $50 million.
The pitch was actually quite synergistic. Hastings proposed that Netflix would become the digital arm of Blockbuster. Netflix would handle the online brand and the back-end DVD by mail logistics, and in return, Blockbuster would promote Netflix in its 9,000 physical stores.
That sounds brilliant.
It was the perfect hybrid of digital infrastructure and physical marketing.
And according to former Netflix CFO Barry McCarthy, who was in the room, John Antioco literally laughed them out of the office.
Yes.
He viewed Netflix as a tiny, unprofitable niche business that was losing money hand over fist.
It is incredibly easy, with the benefit of hindsight, to view Antioco and the Blockbuster board as foolish, to say, look at these dinosaurs laughing at the future. But if we apply strict corporate analysis rather than hindsight, we are looking at a textbook, almost tragic example of the innovator's dilemma.
Right, and I want to push back on this popular narrative that Blockbuster's leadership was just stupid. Let's look at the reality of Antioco's position in that room. Netflix's entire competitive advantage was the subscription model with zero late fees.
Right.
If Blockbuster were to acquire Netflix for $50 million and adopt that model, they would have to eliminate their own late fees, which means John Antioco would have to walk into his next quarterly earnings call with Wall Street analysts and say, good news, we bought a tiny startup for $50 million. Bad news, to integrate them, I am voluntarily wiping out $800 million in pure 100% margin profit from our balance sheet.
Wall Street would have absolutely crucified him. His stock would have tanked overnight, the shareholders would have revolted, and he likely would have been fired by the board immediately. He was trapped.
That's the tragic irony, right? The very profit center that made Blockbuster successful, the late fees, was the strategic vulnerability that prevented them from adapting. The quarterly earnings pressure of a publicly traded company, combined with the massive debt they were servicing from the Viacom spinoff, mandated that they protect that $800 million today, even if it meant sacrificing the future of the company tomorrow.
He's damned if he does, damned if he doesn't.
Exactly. They physically could not endure the short-term financial pain required for long-term survival.
And when Blockbuster finally did attempt this painful pivot, a few years later, the internal corporate warfare over those exact profit margins simply tore the company apart.
Let's track that whiplash, because the final spiral is chaotic. We are in the mid-2000s now. By 2004, the threat of Netflix is undeniable. Their DVD by mail service is exploding. John Antioco, realizing his earlier miscalculation, launches a desperate, belated pivot. He launches Blockbuster Online to compete directly with Netflix.
And in 2005, he finally bites the bullet and eliminates late fees.
Yeah.
He axes the toxic revenue stream. But the financial bloodbath is exactly what he feared it would be.
How bad was it?
Eliminating late fees cost the company roughly $200 million in lost revenue right out of the gate. And simultaneously, it cost another $200 million in heavy capital investment to build out the online infrastructure and the mail distribution centers to fight Netflix.
So they are suddenly burning hundreds of millions of dollars. But Antioco doesn't stop. In 2006, he launches a program called Total Access. And honestly, looking at the mechanics of Total Access, it was a brilliant consumer proposition.
It was the one thing Netflix couldn't do. Under Total Access, a Blockbuster online subscriber could receive a DVD by mail, watch it, and instead of waiting days to mail it back and get the next one, they could take that DVD, walk into a physical Blockbuster store, drop it off, and immediately exchange it for a free in-store rental.
Consumers absolutely loved it. It merged the physical footprint and the digital mail service perfectly. It allowed instant gratification. But there was a massive, fatal problem under the hood, right?
The unit economics were disastrous.
How bad?
They were horrific because Blockbuster was paying for the postage, the overhead of the physical store, and giving away a free rental. The data shows that Blockbuster was losing $2 on every single total access transaction.
Wow. So the more successful the program was, the faster they bled to death. They were literally hemorrhaging cash just to buy market share back from Netflix.
And this cash burn triggered an all-out boardroom coup. Carl Icahn, the notorious activist investor and corporate raider, had amassed a very large stake in Blockbuster. He looked at the balance sheet and despised the online cash burn.
Because it hurt the margins.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He didn't care about beating Netflix in the mail. He cared about the profit margins of the physical stores. Icahn argued that Antioco was destroying the company's profitability and demanded an immediate rollback of all digital investments. In 2007, after a bitter proxy fight, Icahn successfully forces Antioco out of the CEO position.
So this is the incredible whiplash of the company. After years of delay, they finally align with digital transformation. They build a product consumers actually like, albeit unprofitably. And Wall Street steps in and kills it because it hurts the quarterly margins.
Right.
Icahn gets Antioco fired, and he installs James Keyes as the new CEO.
And James Keyes' background is vital here. He was the former CEO of 7-Eleven. He was a retail guy, a pure brick-and-mortar executive.
And what does a 7-Eleven executive do with a struggling video store?
He completely reverses course. Keyes' strategy was to kill the digital initiatives. He dismantled the heavy marketing focus on Blockbuster Online. He raised prices on Total Access, which essentially killed the program, and he refocused the company's entire remaining capital on the physical retail space.
So back to the stores.
Yes. His grand vision was to turn Blockbuster into a technology-agnostic convenience store. He wanted to sell electronics, video games, and snacks alongside movie rentals.
Which leads to one of the most baffling decisions in this entire timeline. In 2008, amidst all this chaos, amidst a massive debt crisis, Keyes attempts a reckless $1 billion buyout of the electronics retailer Circuit City.
He genuinely believed that combining a dying video rental chain with a dying electronics chain would create an unstoppable physical retail behemoth. The distraction internally was immense, and of course the buyout failed and Circuit City went bankrupt a year later in 2009.
If we diagnose Keyes' leadership during this era, what is the core failure? Because Netflix is actively moving towards streaming video at this point, and Keyes is trying to buy an electronics store.
The core failure is a profound overconfidence bias and a fundamental misunderstanding of the evolving consumer market. Keyes didn't respect the digital threat. In 2008, the same year Netflix was exploding, Keyes gave an interview where he publicly stated, "I've been frankly confused by this fascination that everybody has with Netflix."
Yeah.
He added, "Netflix doesn't really have or do anything that we can't or don't already do ourselves."
That quote is just astounding. He fundamentally misunderstood the word convenience. To a guy who spent his career running 7-Eleven, convenience means physical proximity.
Yeah.
It means the store is brightly lit and it's located on the corner of your street, and you can buy a Slurpee while you rent a movie. He entirely failed to grasp that broadband technology had redefined convenience as digital immediacy. Consumers didn't want to drive to the corner anymore. They wanted the content instantly delivered to their screens without putting on their shoes.
By prioritizing physical real estate over digital infrastructure, and by halting the momentum of Blockbuster Online, Keyes sealed the company's fate. The debt load from the Viacom spinoff made survival impossible in the face of declining physical retail revenue.
The math was just broken.
Completely broken. The final numbers are just a testament to the sheer speed of the collapse. From 2003 to 2005, the company lost 75% of its market value.
And it unravels incredibly fast from there. In July 2010, Blockbuster is officially delisted from the New York Stock Exchange because their stock drops to pennies.
Right.
In September 2010, they file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. In their filings, they list $1.46 billion in debt against only $1.01 billion in assets. The math finally caught up with them. And ironically, Carl Icahn, the investor who forced the pivot back to physical retail and ousted Antioco, later called his investment in Blockbuster the worst investment he ever made in his life.
In 2011, Dish Network bought the remains of the company at auction for a mere $320 million. They attempted to keep a fraction of the stores open to sell mobile phones and satellite subscriptions, but it was just a last cause. They ultimately closed the last 300 corporate-owned stores by 2013 and 2014.
Leaving only a single independently owned franchise location operating in Bend, Oregon. A store that functions more as a nostalgia museum of business miscalculation than a viable retail enterprise.
Which is a poetic, if tragic, end to an empire that once boasted 9,000 locations.
So as we synthesize everything we've pulled from these sources today, the demise of Blockbuster is clearly not a simple fable about the internet appearing out of nowhere and destroying a helpless company.
Not at all.
It is a highly complex autopsy. It is the story of staggering, self-inflicted corporate debt originating from that Viacom spinoff, which paralyzed their ability to innovate. It is the story of an addiction to punitive customer late fees that actively alienated the very people they relied upon. And ultimately, it is the story of an inability to cannibalize their own physical infrastructure, those 9,000 stores, to survive the digital age. They built an architecture of dominance that became a prison.
Exactly. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final concept to mull over based on the data we've reviewed.
Okay.
Think back to that meeting in Dallas in 2000. When Reed Hastings pitched Netflix, their true weapon was not just the fact that they were mailing DVDs in red envelopes. Their true weapon, which Blockbuster completely failed to understand, was their ability to gather granular behavioral data on consumer viewing habits.
Right, because Netflix knows exactly what you browse, what you pause, what you abandon after 10 minutes.
Precisely. Every rental, every rating, every delayed return fed an algorithm that understood the consumer better than the consumer understood themselves. Blockbuster had 60 million loyal customers walking through their doors every week, but they tracked almost nothing but late fees and inventory movement.
They didn't know their customers at all.
No. Netflix tracked human desires.
Mm-hmm.
Blockbuster tracked failures.
Yeah.
So if data is the ultimate corporate weapon, you have to look at the landscape today and wonder what massive, seemingly invincible physical retail chains exist right now that are sitting on mountains of unanalyzed consumer data, completely blind to the tech-native startups currently preparing to render them obsolete.
It really makes you look at the corporate landscape a little differently.
Yeah.
The next time you see a seemingly invincible retail giant on the corner, remember the underlying mechanics we unpacked today?
Yeah.
The storefront might look perfectly healthy, the brand might be ubiquitous, but you have no idea what the balance sheet is hiding. You don't know if their structural foundation is solid, or if it is already fractured beyond repair by debt and a toxic business model, just waiting for the pressure of the future to shatter it completely.